Maureen and Deanna, was so happy to have this conversation with you. We connected with you on LinkedIn a few months back and just been really impressed with your work and your approach to your work. And through our conversation, just noticed we have a lot of similarity in terms of the type of clients that we support. They tend to be very busy team, working in really high pressure environment, and in an environment that having a lot of change happening. So they have to shift their team's way of thinking or working or onboarding new team member into that environment. But because their operational needs is so high, they can't just pause and then take time out to actually learn things together. So having to figure out how do you incorporate that learning and into day-to-day flow of the team's work. So in that context, we just thought we'll come together and see what we can share and help folks who are finding themselves in similar situations. So maybe we'll start with a little bit about you and your business.
Yeah. Maureen and I have known each other for quite a while. We have a long background in teaching and learning design. We came together, co-founded WorkWise Design, our instructional design agency, about a year and a half ago now. And we're out there trying to help people, just like in the context you were mentioning, in very complicated workplaces that have to kind of move with the times, have to bring people up to speed, introduce new members to their teams, and do more than just a knowledge share, but behavior change, actual learning that drives performance and impact.
Yeah, and what usually bring them to you?
I think the common thread that we see is that people recognize that there's a need and that they're not quite sure how to fill it. We've often had people see our content on LinkedIn and think to themselves, oh, that is what we're missing on our team, where our learning is not maybe sticking, or we don't have time to take out for a full week to do a training, or our learning and development team is already maxed out and we need to complement that, or we don't have a learning and development team and we need some support because we need learning. And so the common thread that we've seen is that people tend to know their pain point, and the pain point is we don't have capacity. And then they want to be able to design learning that works. When learning is intentional, there's a stickiness to it, where if it's just ad hoc or you don't quite know where you're going and there's no map, then it's not going to stick.
Yeah, I know in our conversations with you originally, it was sort of like there's magic that happens behind the curtain, right? So I'm curious if you can describe a little bit more about the work that you do and the magic that you bring that helps bridge a client from where they are to where they want to get to. How do you describe what you do?
Well, I think one of the things that we try to focus on is informing our clients that learning isn't like an event. It's more like a system. And so they'll come to us trying to plan a workshop, and they want some help with making sure that the workshop functions properly. We talk to them about, well, is the workshop the full learning system that you need, or do you need some other pieces there? Do you need some online between facilitated sessions? Do you need some reference guides for when the training's over? But so we have a lot of conversations as we work with them. In terms of actually trying to design the system, it always starts in the same place. It starts with learning outcomes. And this is something that people who don't have a background in learning design often step over without realizing it. They think they know their objective. They think they know there's a performance issue and we're solving it. And that's our learning outcome. But really the learning outcomes are about breaking that down. Like, how do we actually achieve that shift in behavior that we're looking for? What are the actual measurable and observable pieces that we can hand off to our team so that they know whether they're doing it, or if we're teaching leaders, how they know their team members are doing it. So I say the whole behind the curtain things is just helping them uncover little pieces in between what they were already doing that helps clarify it for them. That would at least be the start of the journey.
I love that you talked about behavior shift, because I think that's something that Hung and I see too, and we aspire to in our work as well. I mean, quite often I get a request for delivering a workshop or a training event, and in a couple of hours, it's hard to create the level of sustainable change that I think most people are really looking for. But you have time constraints and resource constraints and sometimes large teams that you're trying to bring together. And so it's all this disconnect between the expectation versus reality, right? So it's great that you raise the level of thinking to the system level and try to bring your client's eyes up to the horizon rather than focusing on a one and done sort of session.
I love that you asked them about the learning outcome. And we don't use the word learning outcome in our work, but I think we're talking about the same thing. Let's say we come and work with you and your team, and 3 months or 6 months from now, what do you want to be different than now? What would you have then that you and your team don't have now? And I think having that conversation alone can be really valuable for the leader, because a lot of time they think they understand what the problem is and they formulate what they think is the solution. But when we can have a conversation about what needs to shift, that can actually help us rethink what is the right approach to the work to actually create that lasting, sustaining change for sure. So what follows that? What's your typical process?
We often meet with clients to have an initial sort of conversation about what's going on. It's really important for us to understand what is the gap or where is the pain point, and also where do they want to be at the end. And so from there, we can look at those learning outcomes. Depending on what the product or products are that they want us to create, we will have a map on where we're going and how we're going to do that. So we don't ever move from one step to the other without approval from the client. That's a really important piece of it. And it doesn't have to be a long, drawn out process. Often it can just be an email saying like, yep, good to go. Deanna and I often talk about how we've worked in this sector for so long and that we can jump in at any point that a team is at, ask the right questions to know where they are, where they need to go, and develop from there.
There are so many similarities in the work that we do. You can't take a step forward if you don't know what you're walking towards, and defining those goals and then figuring out what is it that's getting in your way, or what needs to exist that doesn't currently, or what needs to happen that isn't right now, that will help you get there. Obviously, the expertise is different, but it's fascinating to hear that it's a very common approach that we take, right? We have to know what better looks like and what needs to be different and what are the goals.
Yeah, and there's a bit of work from the client. That's the piece that I'm also hearing. We need that partnership with the client, right? There is a lot of conversation and there is work that the client need to do on their part to make sure that the work that we're going to create, whatever that is, will work for them and will work for the team. And there is a lot of touch point that needs to happen and checking in to making sure that we are heading in the right direction. And I think that's the other piece that I hear that is very similar as well.
Can be as much or as little as they want, really. And we do have some clients who we've worked with for a long time and they're a bit more hands-off, and we'll email them and say, okay, this is done, and they'll literally write back and say, great. But then other clients, they're a bit more in the process. Maybe they have a bit of a smaller team. They're more hands-on. They're more involved. It really does depend on the client. I guess we try not to over-communicate in a way. I agree with you, though. There is that collaboration in that process all the way through. And then we do take cues from the client as to how much they want to communicate with us.
I think actually it's a balance. One of the things that Maureen and I are hyper aware of is how dysfunctional sometimes the project management of instructional design can be. And so this is why we keep clarifying for our clients' sake, you don't have to be involved deeply all the time. You need to ensure that what we're designing is a fit for what you're looking for, and you need to give us that feedback. But we don't have to have weekly meetings for an hour, right? The client that Maureen's referencing that just gives us one-word answers is because we've worked together for over a year now, right? We have understood their context, but I am glad you brought up the idea of collaboration, because with some clients it can actually be the other end and they almost forget there's a collaboration. Traditionally in instructional design, you have the designer and then you also have the SME, a subject matter expert. And more, we're almost, especially with the introduction of artificial intelligence, are being asked to do more research and take place of the SME, or the client doesn't always want to provide a SME. And so this is an interesting shift, but we have to remind our clients, we are the experts in instructional design. We still need some other expertise here to ensure it aligns. And this comes up especially heavy in designing scenarios that are meaningful for them to engage in. So I'm wondering if you found something like that in your facilitation, like you still need the group's expertise to ensure that you're tailoring it to the right people.
Oh, absolutely. There are certain questions that we'll never skip up front, because really you can create the best plan. And then as soon as you step into the room, the dynamics of the team, the personalities, the experiences they have, they all come to the forefront. And that can make or break an experience of people. I think in our work, we all look at the leaders as the SMEs on the team itself and on the work context, the environment and the goals and the problems that need to be solved. We rely on them quite a bit for that. And then it's also asking questions to help them take some different perspectives and see what they might not be seeing from where they're sitting right now. And we've even contemplated, how much do we need to do a bit more of that upfront assessment with a team so that we can make sure that we're asking questions that a leader may not ask, or we can validate some of the things that a leader is observing or uncover some new things that they might not have been aware of. And that's something that we look at with each client that we work with. How much do we need to do a little bit of that upfront assessment so that we can bring a full picture to the leader as well?
Yeah. And part of the motivation for us to have conversation with you is that a lot of time we have differently materials that we have developed over the years on certain topic, like, how do you recognize burnout? How do you manage burnout on your team? What are healthy boundaries? What does that look like when you're in a service-oriented, high-pressure environment? How do you balance between the need to be responsive to your client and have healthy boundaries for your team? We have certain materials ready to deliver or facilitate. But yet, what we find time and time again when we get into these rooms is it's not really the lack of information, right? Like what you said, it's the behavior change that they're looking for. And in order to facilitate that, we find that we need more information about what's getting in their way right now, what's making that learning not stick, using your own wording, so that we can think about what else would actually help facilitate that change. I'm curious, have you encountered a situation where you're like, oh, I'm not sure if training is what they need, or training alone might not be what they need?
I think it depends on how we think of training. For Maureen and I, it's a pretty broad term. And I think most of our clients, when they come to us, it's some aspect of training, because we would have in their workshops, coaching, information sessions, resources, podcasts, there's so much that could be there. So maybe a question within what you're asking that reflects to our experience is, what are they actually looking for? You generally like 3 categories of learning that we can talk about: knowledge sharing, behavior shifting, or value adjusting, right? And so we talk about those 3 different things because for us, that directs how we write learning outcomes, right? Which is our first step to getting going. And so people will often come in and they'll ask for training, and generally some form of training is a part of the picture, but often it's a shift from knowledge sharing to either, let's talk about the values that your organization has and how we can help you train your teams to live up to those values, or what is the performance metric that you need your team to live up to that they're missing right now. So it's often starts from a place of knowledge, and we have to kind of guide them into those other ideas.
Yeah. I just wanted to add as well, in the 2 broad categories that we work with are directly with teams looking for that behavior change, looking for that systems change. And then also on the other side, as we work with learning and development teams who are maybe at capacity or just need a little bit of extra support. I found also that our approach in that systems thinking and starting with learning outcomes first and creating a map for where you want to go is not always how all learning and development teams work. And so we will often have teams who will say to us, they've never done it this way before, or their process was totally different. And so we've made an impact also on some learning and development teams. If you have that map, it just makes your life and your work so much easier in the long run.
That's an interesting thought about how sometimes we go in to deliver a service, and usually that service is outlined in an agreement, and it's like, okay, we've facilitated the session or we've delivered the training, and so it's done. And yet there are so many ripple effects that come out of it. And sometimes it is actually teaching them a different way to approach their work, a different way to have a conversation, a different way to foster connection on their teams that just can't be captured or valued, right? It goes beyond any service agreement that we've put together, for sure. Yeah, the clients that we serve, they're watching what we do. It's a great opportunity for them to add tools to their toolkit that they didn't initially sign up for, right? But it's kind of a cool flip on our work that we're not just delivering a product or a service. We're actually teaching people different ways to show up at work and lead teams and learn.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, it makes me think of the one client that we had, and in our proposal, we had put in our value statement, what we believe in and how we'd like to approach our work, and some kind of boundary statement that we have because of who we are and the way that we work. And I think that was actually one of the things that drew them to want to work with us, because that was the very thing that they're trying to work on as a team. So yeah, like there's so many things that are beyond the deliverable that is agree on the agreement that our clients get through the experience working with us too. So that's very cool. Yeah.
Yeah, we model the way a little bit, don't we? And I think that client actually did incorporate that into their own agreements down the road. They were like, oh, that's actually a good way to say your boundaries out loud. So we're going to look to do the same. Can you help us define those? Yeah.
I want to pick back on what Deanna said. I love how you define training. There's knowledge sharing, and then there's behavior, and then there's values. I think the value piece is really interesting. I don't think I've ever heard too many training and development professional actually talk about learning as a tool to shift or identify a team's values.
Yeah, and you're not alone. Very few people have contemplated that. I think a lot of people believe values just kind of in the air, and if people spend time together, they'll just absorb them somehow. And so when you suggest that it is something that can be taught to a certain degree, it's not the same as teaching cognitive skills or behavioral skills, right? It is a bit different because to adopt different values, you have to be willing to change your identity, really. So it is something that a lot of learning development teams just don't get involved with because it's not asked for a lot of the time. And so it's one of those things where, do you always do what the client asks, or do you look at the bigger picture and your expertise and what you can bring to the table? And so definitely shifting to values, it actually is related to a well-known structure in instructions and design called Bloom's taxonomy. And a lot of people are familiar with that term, but are only familiar with the cognitive domain that he created. There's actually 3 separate domains and 3 different approaches to writing outcomes based off of that. So even just shifting that stage of the development and introducing people to how do you word a learning outcome with really what you want as a value shift or adoption can be really meaningful.
And do you find that clients are open to go there with you?
Most of the time, they're willing to have that initial conversation with us. They're absolutely willing to consider it. The one thing that can interrupt that is there are some organizations that really rely on observational metrics. And it's really hard to observe value shifts, right? I mean, you have to get to the behavior shift before you can see the value within it. And so because these are harder to track, some people will just be like, well, let's just focus on the behavior shift. So there, often what I'll do is interject a little bit about the value before we introduce the behavior that we're actually going to train towards, so that it's coupled together, but without a very obvious learning outcome built around the values.
So at the very top, we talked a little bit about how everybody has had a bit of a not great workplace learning experience. And one that came to mind for me was learning about a topic that evoked a little bit of an emotional response. You could learn about psychological safety. It raised a lot of past experiences for me. And it was training that was delivered online. And so I was taking it on my own. And there was no space to talk about it after. And so as a human participating in the learning experience, I found that I was learning it very much alone, and I didn't have a place to debrief on it and then bond as a team as far as how we collectively learned about it. That was something that stood out for me in some of our initial conversations, is that it feels like there's such a beautiful kind of combination of skills and expertise that we all bring that can help push that sustainable and longer term shift in how we show up and how we behave in the workplace that can be so powerful, but often are siloed off and sectioned off. How beautiful it would be if training and conversation were always one and the same or combined in some way. So we're learning something and then we're talking about it and sharing stories and examples and experiences and learning as a team. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think you're right that a lot of online learning is kind of isolated. And this has been one of the big critiques about online learning and why some people just don't think it's a place you can learn. As a learning designer, I disagree with that idea that you can't learn that way. You definitely can, but it has to be structured differently. And this is something that's been neglected in a lot of places. One of the things that we've shifted into trying is still working with this subject matter expert, is getting them to record responses, either written or preferably video, and saying, after this learning you have, you might be experiencing X, Y, Z. But let's talk about this. It's not the same as having someone there to talk to, but at least there's an acknowledgement that a lot of people are going to be feeling something, and maybe some guidance on how to debrief that with yourself. One of the things that I have seen shift over time is this acknowledgement that your learning isn't just isolated. And we will refer you not just to your colleagues or your bosses, but reach out to the rest of your network in your life, right? So there are some small shifts that can happen. If you can integrate a live conversation after some individual learning, that's always great. But so much of it is self-paced, and you and your teammates are not on the same page and not doing this on the same week or year even. So some of that's very difficult still.
So if in your work, you're helping your clients imagine where they want to be or what they want to be different, what would you say looking forward, how you hope to see learning shift in the future? And what is the absolute best outcome that we could be aspiring to when it comes to helping equip people with knowledge, behavior shifts, and with alignment to values when they step into the workplace every day?
It really is that systems thinking for us. Like Deanna said so beautifully, learning is not an event. It's not a single serving. It is that system. It's the map. And so the way that we approach our business and the clients is that we don't want it to be just a very quick sort of one and done. We want that long-term, that systems shift, especially working in those high pressure situations. We hope that we have helped shift the system enough and support the system enough that you can move through those really tricky times and lean back on that foundation of that system and that learning and thread it through. And Deanna and I have worked in all levels of education really, and we've really seen that behavior change with adults. It's so different than when kids are learning, and you have to make it relevant to them. You have to make it so that they see the immediate implication in their lives or their workplace.
The other thing that was just coming to my mind is learning how to learn. So that's some of the conversation we have with our clients is the reasons we're doing this is because this is how people learn. I think it is ideal for people to understand how learning happens so that when they go forward and they're not going to reach out to learning designers or facilitators for everything. They need to be able to act in the moment sometimes. If they can pick up on some of those, how people actually learn gets from us as we go forward, then that would contribute to the ideal.
Yeah, we've learned a lot just from our conversations with you, and it really has helped me thinking about our work from a learning frame. We always talk about our work as culture work, like how do we shift a culture on our team? But culture is actually made up of people behaviors and values, right? And so when we're trying to shift that, we are trying to shift those behaviors. We are trying to shift the values. And so how do we think about how adults learn in how we do our work has been super helpful for us too. So yeah, so I think I will stop us here. Thank you so much for joining us for the conversation today. And I hope that this won't be kind of the last conversation that we'll have.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having us. Yeah, it's always lovely speaking with you too.